It's like a nice sunny day today, lots of people outside. Okay, what did I read today? Kind of some interesting stuff. I guess the first one that I read here, it talked about how apparently certain regions, they want to use drones more than helicopters, like they just want to replace them as well. I guess in this case, it's about monitoring sharks. It says NSW government unveils new shark strategy, more drones, fewer helicopters. The New South Wales government has announced its new $8 million strategy to protect beachgoers from sharks this year, investing in improved drone technology and the continued use of smart drumlines at high-risk locations. Up to 80 drones will be deployed, equipped with advanced technology that detects the size and species of sharks. To me, it makes sense. I mean, sending out a manned helicopter is probably so expensive compared to a modern-day drone that you can just send out there quickly. Although with that thought, people are saying potentially drone flyers are going to be, I guess you could say, dangerous. They're not really trained to do so. Like here it says, more drones should mean more training. Ben Beasley is the president of Lennox Head and Ballina Leba Board Riders Club, as well as pilot and an accredited trainer of commercial drone operators. He said his main concern about increasing number of drones was the education and training of operators, saying, quote, "I feel as though the volunteers don't get enough training to be able to operate the drones safely through the surf clubs. Being a pilot myself, there's been many times where you come pretty close to proximity to drones. If one of those was to come crashing through the windscreen of my aircraft, it's probably going to send me to the ground." Mr. Beasley said there should be a focus on ensuring drone operators are well trained and have broader understanding of the aviation industry. In terms of investment from the government, I think that would be a one way to make sure the sky's a safe place, not just the waters. With that thought, in my opinion, when it comes to safety and training, it should come down more to teaching people how to actually fly. Not basically stuffing them with all this stuff about traditional manned aviation, where for the most part, it does no good to make like the drone flyer actually like a safer flyer. It's like doing a driver's license. Ultimately, it's more about the basic knowledge to be aware of things like traffic signals and stuff like that, and most of it is focused on actual driving. Imagine all these questions trying to make sure that you can be a mechanic of sort. And then I was reading this topic that was kind of interesting. It deals with the whole Black Lives Matter situation just because of what happened and the racism conversations that are being brought up because of it. And some people are saying you shouldn't say Black Lives Matter, you should say All Lives Matter. And with that, that's creating so much, I guess, division between people, where they're saying if you say All Lives Matter, then you're being labeled as, for example, like a racist, and that's not the right way to do it. And with that in mind, some people are trying to use analogies to explain to people saying, don't say that because it's not appropriate. Of course, the other side would be, what are you talking about? You should say all lives matter because basically it's inclusive of everyone. You're not just specifically saying one specific group of individual is acceptable. So this one's kind of interesting. This one says, Harvard grad Clara Janover says she lost Deloitte job over TikTok stab threat. So she basically tried to use an analogy where it was along the lines of, if you, for example, have like a little cut on your hand and you're bleeding, and I guess someone else is excessively bleeding over like a stab wound, then you saying, hey, my cut matters is kind of the equivalent in her mind to saying like the all lives matter in that situation, whereas the other person who is basically bleeding profusely needs the attention more. Although I guess the way she said it and so forth, it basically triggered people in the wrong way. You can kind of see it here.
The next person who has the sheer nerve, the sheer entitled caucasity to say all lives matter, I'm gonna stab you. I'm gonna stab you. And while you're struggling and bleeding out, I'm gonna show you my paper cut and say, my cut matters too.
So with that, apparently people interpret that as she was actually going to, for example, stab people who said all lives matter, which wasn't the case to my understanding. In my opinion, it was a really poor analogy overall. Because it made me think too, is this issue really that big? Because even like sports sites were even saying like here, explaining what all lives matter actually means when you say it. Like, is the issue really that big, like with this phrase? So it made me kind of think, maybe I should try explaining it with my personal interpretation of what I understand of the situation. When it comes to things like analogies, in my opinion, one of the fundamental flaws is a lot of people don't use the examples with the exact type of scenario that's happening. Kind of like what I said before, where the person was being racist to me, if you guys remember, like in the comment, and some people were saying, what, there's nothing racist about that. But then when you put everything in context afterwards, you're like, okay, yeah, maybe like something's wrong there. So with that, here's my personal thought and analogy to kind of, I guess, describe the situation in general to hopefully open up the perspective. Now, keep in mind, this analogy is not to debate, for example, things I've read about whether or not the situation is actually as serious as it is per se. I mean, you can argue about that, just like how people are saying there's no such thing as racism. Or at the same time, I know when it comes to this Black Lives Matter, just from what I read, some people are saying they believe in the cause, but they don't believe in certain organizations, like completely different topics. So here is more about the analogy to give perspective of why someone would think all lives matters, like that phrase is ridiculous, and vice versa, why they think the Black Lives Matter phrase is ridiculous. So let's pretend you're in an area where people are predominantly, let's just say for the sake of the example, they're Caucasian. And in the area itself, there's probably only maybe a handful of black people. Now with that, you would think, okay, black people, they feel really uncomfortable around the area. They don't want to go to things like restaurants, for example, that aren't, say, black owned because they're afraid they'll be judged and all that. So with that thought, a lot of businesses and restaurants, they put a sign outside saying, "Black people welcomed." So on one end, you can say, oh great, that business is actually just trying to welcome black people, saying, we treat you just like everyone else, so feel free to come in here. Whereas I can easily see on the other side of the perspective, people say, what the heck kind of sign is that? You're a business, you're a restaurant. You shouldn't just say black people welcome, you should say all people welcome, correct? I mean, everyone should be welcome to go to your restaurant and business, inclusive. Now to me, what's missing in those types of, I guess you could say, analogies is people don't put in context what the scenario actually entails to make you realize, oh wait a minute, that's completely different. So let's put in a perspective here where exact same scenario right now. There's a restaurant saying, black people welcomed, and again, maybe that person's the only one in the whole community, everyone else is, let's just say, I don't know, Caucasian like I said. So let's pretend in that situation now, 90% of the population there believes that a black person either carries some kind of disease, okay? So basically, if you come even near them, you're gonna get infected or something like that. Or two, they're more likely to commit a crime. So you don't want them anywhere near your business because based on what you see everywhere, what you're taught, they're gonna basically rob you. So why would you want to cater to them? Basically keep away from these people. Now imagine you're that black person walking around this community fully knowing well that everyone sees you in this way. So every business you walk up to, you know they're just giving you like a dirty stare, for example, like, oh, you're about to rob me. Every time you walk past someone, they're like, oh, you must like have some kind of disease and so forth. Imagine in that kind of environment. So how does saying all people welcome, like in that case, solve that situation in general? It won't, because when people say all people welcome, they mean people like them, not you. So in my view, that's why a person there would say black people welcomed, like into that restaurant, because they know the person is basically being prejudged. Everyone else is like against them with all these stereotypes and bias. And this is their way to saying, no, I don't see you in that way. I see you as like a regular person. Now that's where you could debate, for example, like saying, what? There's no way it's that bad in society. Like if they see like a black person there, they're not gonna think like automatically like, what? You have like this disease or something like that, you're gonna automatically rob me? But that's the thing for debate again and to think about, because that's why so many people are so mad about the situation. Like for example, they use the examples of police, I guess, arresting, say, more black people, being more aggressive to them, or just racism in general. Like, is it that big of a problem? I mean, that's a different question to debate. I mean, if you think about it, it's actually true in many situations too. Like for example, if you go to a different country where you're clearly like the minority in whatever way, there's various businesses that say tourists welcome. Like there, why would you say, for example, everyone should be welcome, not just tourists? It's because the tourists are the ones that feel, I guess you could say, isolated. Maybe like the majority of the people think those tourists are nuts and so forth. So you have to basically go out of your way to show, no, you're welcomed like in this community, because other people, they are the quote normal regular people, whereas these tourists aren't. So like there, if you're telling me in general society and the whole world, they view everyone as an equal, then yes, in my opinion, I would say putting things out like those phrases, Black Lives Matter, it makes absolutely no sense. It should mean things like the all lives matter, like they say. But just due to the circumstance and scenario, there I can see the perspective on why people would say, like, no, it doesn't make sense in that case because it's that group that's being, for example, marginalized. I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. Either you believe the situation in general is there's, like, say, a specific group of people who are being marginalized in those ways where it's resulting in things like, say, more violence or loss of opportunities, or you see it as no, there isn't a problem, because that would kind of dictate which, I guess, viewpoint you would actually believe on whether or not there should be a thing saying like Black Lives Matter or all lives matter, so to speak. Alright, see you guys later.